Aloha, Alan. How are you doing?
Fine, fine, thank you, Taiji. Nice to talk to you.
Yes, our families actually know each other. And I want to tell the audience that Toyo Miyatake Studio has a long history of incredible presence in Little Tokyo. It's a professional photographic studio now in its third generation. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm the third generation. That's correct.
Wow. And you even photographed my wedding. Beautiful, beautiful job. And I'd like to talk about the beginnings of the studio because it was established by your world-renowned artist, grandfather, artist Toyo Miyatake. Can you tell me about the history of Toyo Miyatake's studio?
Hey, Toyo Miyatake, my grandfather, started this. He actually purchased a studio in 1923 in the Little Tokyo area, and he came from Japan with his parents, and he had actually had aspirations to be a painting artist, but his grandmother convinced him not to be a starving artist.
Right.
And so she convinced him to be a photographer. So he took up photography. He had a mentor named Harry Shigeta from Chicago, and he learned his trade. And like I said, he purchased a studio in 1923. From that point on, it was a pretty much commercial based studio, but he was also a member of a group called Shakudosha, and that was an artist group in the 20s in the Little Tokyo area, and that was kind of to satisfy the appetite of doing photography as an art. So he kind of had the best of both worlds at that point, because he was lucky there was actually a big movement, an artistic movement then. So, as the studio started building their clients, he also did a lot of work for the Japanese newspaper, the Rafu Shimpo. And through this connection, he was able to meet many Japanese celebrities, because whenever they came here from Japan, the Rafu Shimpo would pick them up at the, probably they came by ship back then, and brought them directly to my grandfather's studio to get a portrait taken, so a picture can run with the story in their newspaper.
How fascinating.
Well, through this, constant networking, he was able to build a very good clientele at that point. And then, as the business was growing, kind of made it through the Depression years, and probably, the business was probably peaking when World War II broke out.
Right.
And at that point, all the Japanese Americans were forced in internment camps at the beginning of World War II.
Yes.
So for that point,
just stop you for a second, because I do want to mention that he had an incredible influence. So of other American renowned photographers, Ansel Adams and Dorothea Lange, they were friends with your grandfather, but especially Edward Weston. And apparently Edward Weston used to show his photography in your grandfather's studio, and I think what I found in my research is that he really was a avant-garde photographer, with a creative energy, that he was collaborating with these other artists, and he really explored the craft, the art of photography that day. So incredible that he had that time in his career that he was doing that. But as you mentioned, it was the interruption of that career is just so tragic to me, but what you were starting to explain, but for those viewers that don't know, 120,000 Americans of Japanese ancestries, Americans, mind you, were forced and evacuated to leave their homes and belongings by our own United States of America government and incarcerated in desert areas, now what we now call American concentration camps. And your grandfather will always be honored as a risk-taking documentary journalist. But I want to point out that he had this other side to him that was so creative, and it did show up in in his activist photographs. But I want you to tell everybody more about this section of his life. For example, do you consider him an activist? And did he always have this kind of activist nature, or did that come out, when he was incarcerated? And there's an interesting story that how he had to do the beginnings of his photographs. I'm wondering, Alan, if you could speak to that a little bit.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Um, you know, when all the Japanese and Japanese Americans were told that they were going to be put into the camps, he had enough foresight he smuggled in a lens and a film holder. And, he went in with the intention of recording this part of history, this very bad part of history. And so once, the family settled in, the story goes is that he took my father aside and said, I got to show you something. So he opened up his bags, he pulled out a lens and a film holder, and he says, I'm going to build a camera because this is not right. This is an injustice. It shouldn't be happening, but it's my duty as a photographer to record this, and in hope that something like this will never happen again. So he had a carpenter help build this camera. And in the beginning, he was illegally shooting photographs, and mainly at dusk and dawn, and in order for him not to be seen. So he was taking photographs. He actually got caught a few times. But you mentioned about Edward Weston. He became friends with Edward Weston in the 30s, and he actually helped him sell some of his photographs as part of an exhibit with this artist group he was with. So the connection here is that Edward Weston, Ansel Adams, and the camp director, Ralph Merritt, were friends and all members of the Sierra Club. And my family believes that it was this nepotism that eventually allowed Toyo to legally take pictures in the camps.
That is a fascinating story, and it really does give me goosebumps because he took a risk, what could have been the consequences of getting real caught, and just the importance of working from within is just so insightful and incredible on his part. And so I really honor your grandfather for doing this, because I think the photography and art has that role that that even today, those photographs are being shown. And especially, I'd like to get your opinion about the recent travesties that's going on in this country. I guess the fact is that racism has always been here. And I'd like to think that, the terrible incarceration that happened really changed America, and we would really learn from that. But now we are seeing the hatred of Asians toward Asians today. And I'm wondering, what would your grandfather think of that? Would he be disappointed, or what do you think?
Well, I think my grandfather kind of mixed feelings on this, because I think my grandfather, number one, obviously would be disappointed that it still exists. But I also think he feels that his work is even more important right now.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, he would be happy and proud of the fact that first his son Archie
Mm-hmm.
kept the photographs alive and
Mm-hmm.
active.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm following
Mm-hmm.
in the same footsteps, that it just feels like we need to continue Toyo's goal
Mm-hmm.
and keeping these photographs out there. So it maybe it's not going to stop
Mm-hmm.
all this injustice, but you know, at least it's out there. You know, I get calls all the time for people to include in their documentaries or books, and the encouraging part is when I get asked for it to be in school textbooks. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's the key, I think,
I
because
see.
at least we're going to start hitting people younger
Mm-hmm.
and get them more educated. You know,
Yes.
I thought about my grandfather during 9/11.
Mm.
And when 9/11 and then they started profiling right away,
Yes.
I first thought, oh my gosh, you know, that's terrible.
Yeah.
But every time there is a racial injustice, it's interesting because I tend to get calls,
Mm.
which means that's a good thing. People are thinking about it, they're relating to it,
Mm.
and it gives me the opportunity to keep it exposed.
Oh my God, I love that. I love that, and importance of art. You know what? I definitely believe in, and I have to say that I went to the University of Hawaii the other day, and I was I was floored because there is an exhibit by Dorothea Lange, her collection of photography that she did on the camps. And so it's there, as you say, for the young people to look at. And I mean, this is what needs to continue, you know, the continual exposure. Um, want to also express my opinion for allowing me to use two images of his. So for the Heroes at Borders, if nobody has seen this, I'm sorry, but we colorized it a little bit and things, but it's an exhibit that's at the Japanese American National Museum. But and then one other photograph that I'd like to talk to a little bit. But can you talk to me in particular about his self portraits? I think his self portraits are very beautiful, really.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you know, it's interesting as I have been learning the archives of my grandfather, I've noticed that there are quite a few portraits of him.
Mhm.
You know, at first I thought, wow, is he just vain or, you know, but 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 as I look at them,
Mhm.
it's kind of a history lesson to me
Mhm.
because it kind of tells me all the interests he had, the stages of his life, and how it all relates to photography. And I it's pretty neat because as when he first came here, his parents had like a Japanese bakery, like a manju shop,
Mhm.
and I guess they must have served soda and ice cream. So there's a picture of him as a soda jerk, you know, serving, you know, soda and ice cream, you know, and then there's more pictures of him actually as a fisherman.
Oh,
Um, he was a musician. He played the saxophone
oh.
in Manzanar.
Mhm.
There's pictures of him in a baseball uniform. So, you know, he seemed, it makes me learn more and more about him, how well versed he was.
Mhm.
Yet you could tell that there's probably twice as many uh, portraits of him as a photographer.
Mm, right. Well, you know, when you tell me all this, it's so obvious that he was a storyteller, right? And he just wanted to incorporate his life in the story and tell, you know, from a personal side. And I think that's the power of his art. And then I was, thank you for also granting me the use of another photograph called Three Boys Behind a Barbed Wire Fence. Um, can you talk a little bit about that photograph?
The three boys behind Bob Wire Manzanar image,
Mhm.
probably the most iconic internment camp picture that's out there right now. It's
Mhm.
probably the most used, and
Mhm.
yeah, it's pretty amazing photograph and how powerful it is with the barbed wire and everything. But it also gets talked about quite a bit, because when people start looking at it after a while, they start figuring out, well, wait a minute, why are these boys on the outside of the fence and
Oh,
things like that? And it definitely creates a lot of conversation, and I think that's key, to a successful piece of art. So, and I also had an opportunity to actually meet these three boys,
oh,
and that was an honor. And
oh,
that's actually that photograph back there,
yes.
where it's a current picture of these three boys
Oh
behind barbed wire.
my God. I was kind of rushed on the project, but my dream was actually to include them as I don't know if they're still alive today, but getting their reaction to all that's happening today. But that's an incredible story. So I think the photograph was taken after he was given permission to take photographs at Manzanar. Is that correct?
Yes, it's kind of undocumented on exactly when Toyo was allowed to legally take pictures.
Mm.
I think some of it has to do with the fact that once the camp director, Ralph Merritt, granted him permission,
Mhm.
it was with stipulations,
Mm.
because he could set up the picture, but he
Mm.
wasn't allowed to snap the shutter. It had to be a Caucasian person
God.
to actually snap the shutter.
Oh my.
So after a few mistakes here and there,
Mhm.
uh, Toyo actually complained to the camp director, and
Mm.
at that point he said, "You know something, I really can't see what's going on my left side. So why don't you just go ahead and shoot freely?" So I think that's why there really isn't a real documentation on when he became, a legal photographer there.
Wow.
A friend of mine actually came up to me and said, "Hey, let me show you this wedding portrait
Mhm.
that your grandfather shot of my parents." And it was taken in May in 1943. So I'm guessing that that was taken like in a studio backdrop. So sometime, I'm guessing in the year 1943
Mhm.
was when he was legally photographing, in Manzanar.
I see. Interesting. Wow, that is just such fascinating history. I wonder, in fact, did he talk to you about, the camps and things? And was he angry when he talked to you, or how did he relate the experience to you personally?
You know, a lot of the conversation within my family
Mhm.
probably came more from my father and my mother.
Mm.
Um, any conversation that I had with my grandfather
Mhm.
was probably when we were technically in the dark room, and I got to share the dark room with him while he was printing some of these.
Mm.
So I did not have any personal conversation with him about camp and when he shot, but my family was a little bit different than many of the Japanese American families, because most of them didn't talk about it,
Yes.
and my family, and I think it's because there was these photographs all over the place, and there was always conversation about them,
Mhm.
who was in it, who they went to high school with,
Oh,
and my parents. Okay, this happened about 10 years ago. I had them at Manzanar, and I was taking their picture, and my mother says, "Hey, if it wasn't for Manzanar, you might not be here." And I said, "What are you talking about?" It's just, "This is where we met." So, there's this good and bad about Manzanar that, fortunately, I think for me, my parents talked about it.
Yes, yes. Oh, Thank you for sharing that. Yes, you know, my parents were in camp and my grandparents, they always, you know, try to put it in the positive light, like you're talking about, because, you know, they really had to survive. And I think that it was the spirit in them that really just pulled it together and say, hey, we're going to make a good situation out of what we have. But I think for future generations, you know, that's not enough. We got to really, really learn what went on here and the travesty that happened. And, you know, like when other races in the US are scapegoat when events happen globally, that is really, really, that is the lesson that we have to learn, has to stop. And so I'm just so thankful to the work that your grandfather did. And, you know, he's in many prestigious collections, such as the Whitney Museum of Art. And I wonder, are there in fact a lot of photographs that the public hasn't seen yet? You know, because I know that there is a large number of photographs there.
Yes, actually, maybe within the last 10 years or so, I discovered that there was a drawer full of negatives that were labeled studio, Manzanar studio portraits.
Oh my God.
And as I've been going through them and trying to catalog them,
Yeah.
it's interesting because I would say there's quite a few of them that were these family portraits,
Mhm.
and there was always one person in there with a uniform on.
Mm.
And it looks like that this young man enlisted in the army, and the mother and father says, you know, they're obviously proud of them to you know, fight for their country.
Mhm.
But I think realistically, the parents thought, hey, you know something, we better take a family picture, because what if you don't come back?
Oh.
So
Uh,
there was family pictures with people in army uniforms.
oh my gosh.
There were some single portraits, and it's interesting now, because now when I hear familiar names
Mhm.
that sound like it's from this file, I've been able to contact some of the families,
Oh wow.
and I've been trying to get them some of these pictures, because you know that's part of their history too.
Oh, that's so honorable of you. In fact, I do want to give a special thanks to you for continuing the legacy of your grandfather, which is so important. And you know, let's not waste his life's work. You know, but let's end this vicious cycle of bigotry in this country. And it definitely art is a means to do that. So just keep going. And I see that you have a lot of work to continue to keep his legacy alive. I want to thank you very much for this interview. I really honor it.
Well, thank you, Taiji. I really appreciate, you know, and you know, like when you approach me to be able to collaborate with you on projects, you
Mhm.
know, and to keep, you know, Toyo's message out there, I think that's what's important. You
Mhm.
know, you and I are the next generation, and we got to keep it going.
Yes. Can I just, for curiosity, do you have a fond memory of your grandfather that you'd like to share with everybody, or a personality trait that you remember?
Um, you know, I don't know why this always sticks, but
Uh-huh.
when I started helping out at his studio,
Yes.
for some reason they put me in the darkroom first.
Uh-huh.
So I was kind of learning photography from the back end.
Mhm.
But as I was in there printing all, you know, a lot of work that was coming through,
Mhm.
I noticed that there was a spot on this negative that kept coming out on the print. And I thought, man, what, you know, I got to get that spot off there. So I said, hey, Grandpa, what do I do with this? And he said, oh, let me take a look at this. So he gets it, he gets a Kleenex, and he rubs it on his nose, like to get the oil off his nose.
Uh-huh.
And he rubs it across the negative. And I'm thinking, I'm watching, like, what are you doing? And he actually rubbed that spot off.
Oh my
And I
God.
was like, oh my God. And I don't know why, but that's one thing that I always remember about him.
Oh, that's a beautiful memory. You know, I think it's also, it's your way of telling us that he passed on the love for photography and the art of it. And it's so obvious with your generations of family, how he passed that love through the generations. And please keep the studio going because, well, my son and daughter have a long way to their marriage, but hopefully, you know, the studio will be photographing their marriage too. But you really served, you are continuing to serve the Japanese American community in Little Tokyo so well, and you are such, your whole family is so honored. But Alan, thank you so much for your time. I really
Oh,
appreciate
you're
it.
welcome. Please, you know, and then whenever you're in the States, please bring your family. I'll be honored to take your family portrait.
Oh, that's wonderful. I will take you up on that. Okay, thank you again,
All
and we'll
right.
see you soon.
All
Bye-bye.
right.
Bye.
Thanks.